Block 1. He left me nothing. But she left me everything. It's strange how silence can echo louder than words, especially when that silence comes in the form of a will. I remember the moment like it's burned into my skin. Sitting in a sterile lawyer's office that smelled like stale coffee and cold leather, listening to a man in a tie flip through legal pages with all the emotion of a parking meter. To my daughter Melanie, I leave nothing. That was the line, exactly as it was written. No hesitation, no apologies, no hidden clause, just nothing. Everyone else gasped. My stepmother clutched her pearls. My half-brother blinked like he couldn't believe I was real, and my cousin reached over and gently touched my wrist like I had just been slapped in public. But I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't speak, because you don't mourn something you already knew was dead. Let me back up. My name is Melanie Quinn. I'm 29. I work in archival preservation for a small university in upstate New York. I am the kind of person who always reads the plaque under a museum painting and finishes books even if I hate them. In short, not dramatic, not reckless, not loud. Which is probably why no one believed me when I said my father was cruel. Because he wasn't loud either. He wasn't a yeller or a drinker or a door slammer. He was a withholder. Withheld affection. Withheld praise. Withheld explanations. And finally, he withheld my inheritance. He and my mom split when I was 7. There was no custody battle, just a clean divide. I stayed with Mom during the school year, visited Dad every other holiday. We'd go fishing, maybe eat ice cream. He'd talk at me more than to me, like I was an intern in his life rather than a daughter. When I turned 15, my mom passed away. Sudden aneurysm, no warning. I moved in with Dad full-time. That's when things changed, or rather, revealed themselves. He remarried 6 months later. Her name was Darla, a dental hygienist with bleached teeth and passive-aggressive hugs. She already had a son from a previous relationship, Trevor, 2 years older than me, golden child energy in human form. And suddenly, I was an outsider in my own house. Darla ran everything, calendar, chores, even what I wore. I'd come home to find my favorite hoodie thrown out by mistake, or my books replaced with Bibles and etiquette guides. Dad didn't intervene. He just nodded and said, "Darla's trying to help you grow up." When I got accepted to NYU, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my acceptance letter, heart pounding, expecting, I don't know, something. Pride? A smile? Instead, he looked at the tuition and said, "You'll need to figure out how to pay for that." No offer, no conversation, just that. I did figure it out. Scholarships, loans, 3 part-time jobs, and a suitcase that never felt like home. I sent him updates, grades, graduation photos. I called, left voicemails, wrote birthday cards. Most of them went unanswered. So by the time he passed, pancreatic cancer, barely 6 months after diagnosis, I had already grieved the relationship we never had. But I still showed up to the funeral, still wore black, still stood by his casket like a stranger who knew the deceased just well enough to feel weird about it. And when I got the invitation to the reading of the will, I thought, maybe he left me something symbolic. A letter, a keepsake, a book we shared. But instead, he left me nothing. Actually, worse than nothing. He left me a statement. Melanie was always ungrateful. I refused to reward disrespect. Those were his final words to me. Signed, witnessed, legal. But the real story, the one he never saw coming, that started with an envelope I received 2 days later from my grandmother, dead for 8 years. Block 2. Her letter didn't just tell me the truth. It gave me permission to see it. The envelope was off-white, the kind that turned slightly yellow at the edges with time. No return address, just my name. Melanie Quinn. In careful, familiar handwriting, I recognized it instantly. Grandma June. She died when I was 21. Stroke. Quick and cruel. We were close. Closer than I ever was to anyone in my immediate family. She used to say I was too observant for my own good. We shared books, inside jokes, and long talks about people and patterns. She had a sixth sense for human nature, and an even sharper sense of what people hide. I hadn't seen her handwriting in years. I sat on my floor, legs crossed like a kid again, and opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, lined, written in blue ink. The first line: "If you're reading this, your father has probably made one final, terrible decision." I froze. I never wanted to believe he'd do it. But if you've been left out of the will, Mel, this letter is for you. My heart caught in my throat. She knew. You've always been the quiet one, the one who saw everything and said little. That's a dangerous trait in a family like ours. Your father, he never understood you. He only respected what he could measure: obedience, praise, submission. You didn't give him those things, and in his eyes that made you ungrateful. But you were never ungrateful, darling. You just didn't perform your pain for him. I had to pause. My eyes were blurring. There's something you should know. Something I never told anyone. When your mother passed, you were supposed to come live with me. That's what she wanted. That's what we arranged. What? But Darla convinced your father otherwise. Said it was better to keep family together. Said I was too old, too liberal, too soft. She wanted to mold you, so your father cut me out of the conversation, and you were never told. I blinked hard. My hands were trembling. All these years. And I thought my mother just didn't leave a plan, that there was no other option. I wanted to fight it, but I was grieving your mother, and I wasn't strong enough to take legal action. I wrote you letters. Darla intercepted them. She even visited me once, told me to stop confusing you. I felt physically ill. I know you've spent years wondering why no one showed up for you. But I did, Mel. I tried. And I never stopped believing in you. Which is why I set something aside, quietly. Something your father could never touch. At this point, I was holding the letter like it was a living thing. There's a storage unit registered in your name. The key is taped to the back of this letter, Box 87. Inside is everything I wanted to leave you. Journals, savings, bonds, and something else. Documents your father tried to bury. About his finances. About his manipulation. If you choose to do nothing, I'll understand. But if you ever decide to fight back, you won't be empty-handed. I flipped the letter over with shaking fingers. There it was, a small silver key. I stared at it like it might explode. Not because I didn't believe her, but because for the first time, someone had believed in me. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the key like it was a compass, like it could point me toward a truth I'd buried under years of gaslighting, neglect, and tight-lipped survival. By morning, I was in my car. The drive took 2 hours. The storage facility was old but secure, the kind of place where they still handwrite your entry on a clipboard. Box 87? The clerk repeated. Been a while since that one was touched. I followed the narrow hallway, my heart pounding louder with each step. When I reached it, I stood frozen for a second. Then I slid the key into the lock. It clicked open. Inside, a wooden chest, 2 cardboard file boxes, and a sealed envelope that said, "Read this first." I sat on the floor, surrounded by the echoes of a woman who'd passed 8 years earlier, and yet somehow understood the moment better than anyone alive. I opened the envelope. Block 3. I thought he cut me out of his will. I didn't know I'd been holding the knife the whole time. The envelope that said, "Read this first," was thin. Just a few pages. I unfolded it carefully. Inside, my grandmother's handwriting continued, as steady and sharp as ever. Melanie, if you're here, that means you're ready. Not just to know the truth, but to do something with it. She wasn't wrong. You'll find in this chest the documents your father never wanted anyone to see. Financial records, old contracts, copies of trusts, and asset transfers. I obtained them through a friend who used to work at his firm. A man who quietly disapproved of what your father did to your mother, and later, to you. My fingers were already pulling back the lid of the wooden chest. Inside, several folders, a leather-bound journal, and 2 sealed envelopes labeled, "For legal use, for your heart." I swallowed hard. The first folder I opened contained a copy of my mother's original will, not the one my father had referenced in court. This one was notarized, dated a week before her aneurysm, and signed in her clean, confident hand. It stated clearly and unequivocally that guardianship of Melanie Quinn was to be awarded to June Elizabeth Quinn, her mother, in the event of her death. Not my father, not Darla, my grandmother. I sat back, breath caught in my throat. This changed everything. The second folder held asset transfer documents, specifically, records of life insurance payouts from my mother's policy. Over $400,000 had been deposited into an account under my father's name. Money that, according to the terms of the policy, was intended for my care and education. But the transfers showed something else entirely. 6 months after her death, $120,000 had been spent on a down payment for a new house, the house where Darla and Trevor moved in. The rest? Dripped away in personal expenses, luxury purchases, and a private fund for Trevor's college tuition. My name never appeared once. The college fund I had to build from scratch had already existed. They just didn't use it for me. I felt like I was being set on fire from the inside out. And in the middle of it all, I found the most damning piece of evidence. A handwritten letter from my grandmother to her attorney, dated 2 months before her stroke. In it, she stated that she suspected fraud and coercion in the custody and financial handling of her granddaughter, that she was blocked from contact, that her attempts to pursue legal guardianship were discouraged by threats of familial retaliation, and that she believed my father was misusing my mother's estate. "I fear," she wrote, "that if I pass before the truth comes to light, Melanie will grow up believing she was unwanted, that she was inconvenient. I want her to know. She was fought for." By the time I finished reading, I was shaking. Not because I was angry, although I was. Not because I was heartbroken, although I'd been that for years. But because for the first time in my life, I was holding proof, tangible, time-stamped, legally actionable proof that my life had been altered not by fate, but by fraud. I opened the envelope labeled, "For legal use." Inside was a business card, a name I recognized. He was a quiet legend in probate litigation. Used to be on TV in the early 2000s, now semi-retired. Apparently, my grandmother had been one of his private clients. The note attached said, "Tom knows everything. If you decide to contest the will, he'll take the case. No fee. He owes me." I almost laughed. Only Grandma June could pull strings from beyond the grave. I stared at his number. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing on my chest. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about restoring the truth, not just for me, but for the version of me that never got a chance to grow up in love. I called. He answered on the second ring. "Ms. Quinn," he said. "I've been waiting a long time for this call. Block 4. They tried to erase me from the legacy, so I made myself unforgettable. Thomas Brenner didn't waste time. Within a week, I was sitting in his office, not a corporate high-rise, but a converted Victorian house just outside Albany, filled with thick law books, oil paintings, and a dog named Rufus that followed me everywhere. I handed him the folders. He read in silence. Every once in a while, he'd whistle under his breath or mutter, "Unbelievable." When he finished, He leaned back and folded his hands. "This," he said, "is one of the dirtiest cases of informal disinheritance I've ever seen." He explained that contesting a will isn't easy. You can't just be hurt. You need to prove fraud, duress, or mental incompetence at the time of signing. But what I had was stronger. A prior will, my mom's, expressing clear intent. Legal documentation of misappropriated funds. A history of manipulation and blocked communication. And best of all, a notarized letter from June, backed by years of correspondence with his own firm. "This isn't a long shot," he said. "It's a grenade." We filed within 10 days. The claim? Fraudulent execution of parental directives and misappropriation of inheritance assets. In plain English, they stole my future and rewrote my mother's death wish to serve their own comfort. The first reaction came not from Darla, but from Trevor. He DM'd me on Instagram, a platform he hadn't had to use to contact me in years. "You really doing this? Going after Mom, after Dad's gone?" I didn't answer. He followed up. "We're family, Mel. This isn't what Dad would have wanted." That part made me laugh out loud. What Dad wanted was control. What he got was a daughter who finally had receipts. Darla's response came days later, via a cease and desist letter from a third-tier attorney. Laughable, threatening to expose my mental instability and publicize my long history of entitlement. Thomas barely skimmed it before tossing it aside. "Classic intimidation tactic," he said. "Means they're scared." Scared was putting it mildly. The court accepted our petition. A hearing was set. The judge ordered temporary freezing of estate distribution until further review. That meant no one, not Darla, not Trevor, could touch the money or property. Suddenly, the silent ones got very, very loud. One uncle called to say I was disrespecting my father's memory. An aunt posted a cryptic Facebook status about ungrateful children and their obsession with revenge. But I didn't care, because for the first time, they were saying my name again. Even if they spat it, they remembered it. I wasn't invisible anymore. Then came the subpoena phase. Through discovery, we uncovered emails between my father and Darla about keeping June out and adjusting the estate plan to avoid drama. One line from my father sealed the deal. "Melanie's too busy playing college martyr to notice what's happening." That one? That went straight into the filing. The best part? When we deposed Darla, she crumbled. She contradicted herself 5 times, claimed she never intercepted letters, only to admit later she may have filtered some that came from June. She called me difficult and uncooperative and emotionally manipulative, but couldn't explain why I had perfect grades, no disciplinary history, and never once asked for money. When Thomas showed her the life insurance spending report, she went pale. "It was your husband's decision," he said calmly. "But you signed off. You lived in that house. You used that car. You benefited from money earmarked for a grieving child." She asked for a break. We didn't give her one, because for the first time, I was the one setting the terms. Block 5. The courtroom was cold, but the silence from my family was colder. The hearing was set for a Friday morning in March. I didn't sleep the night before. I sat on my couch, rereading Grandma June's letters like scripture. Her words had become my spine, holding me upright when everything else tried to make me fold. I wore navy, professional, unapologetic, hair tied back, no jewelry, no distractions. As I entered the courthouse, I saw them, Darla in a beige blazer too tight for comfort, Trevor beside her, fidgeting like he was waiting for a dentist appointment, not a court ruling. They didn't look at me. Of course they didn't. The judge, a sharp woman with silver hair and no time for nonsense, took the bench. After opening statements, Thomas began walking through the timeline. He was surgical. Every date, every document, every contradiction laid bare with quiet precision. When he presented the copy of my mother's will, the one naming Grandma June as my legal guardian, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. "Was this will ever contested?" "No, Your Honor," Thomas said. "It was simply ignored. Ignored. Like me." Then came the financial records, the insurance payouts, the unexplained tuition fund for Trevor. The timeline of how the money disappeared, slowly, deliberately, and with zero regard for the girl it was meant to support. And then came the letter. The judge read parts of it aloud. "I fear that if I pass before the truth comes to light, Melanie will grow up believing she was unwanted." She paused after that line, looked over her glasses. Right at me. My throat tightened. It was the first time anyone in that room, anyone in my family, looked at me like I wasn't crazy, bitter, or unstable. She saw me. Then came Darla's attorney. Their entire argument hinged on interpretation, that my father had discretion as the sole surviving parent, that my grandmother's materials were dated and emotional, that I had never made a formal claim for funds during his life. It was weak. The judge knew it. But then something happened I wasn't expecting. She called on Trevor. I didn't know he'd be allowed to speak. He stepped up to the witness chair like he was walking into traffic. At first, he defended their decisions, said he didn't know the full story, that he thought I was being taken care of, that his mom never talked badly about me. But then the judge pressed. "Did you ever ask where the money came from for your education?" He hesitated. I assumed it was from Dad. Savings." She raised an eyebrow. "And you never found it strange that Melanie worked multiple jobs while you lived in the same home and attended school without loans?" His voice dropped. "I guess I didn't want to see it." That part, that hit me, because I used to believe that maybe no one wanted to see it, that maybe if I screamed loud enough, someone would turn their head and say, "Wait, that's not right." But no one did, until now. After he stepped down, the judge took a long pause. Then she said something I'll never forget. "This isn't just a case of inheritance. This is about erasure. This young woman was not simply disinherited. She was denied acknowledgement, support, and belonging. And the law does not reward negligence disguised as discretion." She banged the gavel. Judgment in my favor. The will was deemed compromised. The estate frozen pending redistribution. All misappropriated funds would be recalculated and repaid, and I would be granted primary heir status under the original maternal directives. I won. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Because I hadn't grieved what I really lost. The family that never wanted me in the first place. Block 6. I got the house, the money, the name, but I still had to go home alone. The news traveled faster than I expected. Within 2 days of the court ruling, I received over 20 texts. Some from old high school friends, others from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to since I was a teenager. Most of them said some version of the same thing. I always knew something wasn't right. "You were so quiet. No one knew how bad it was. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." I didn't reply to most. Because while the verdict was loud, my emotions were silent. Not numb, just quiet, in a way that felt eerie. Like stepping into a house after a long trip and realizing someone rearranged all the furniture. I went back to the storage unit that weekend. Box 87, where it all began. I sat there, on the cold concrete floor, with June's journals stacked beside me. I opened one. Her handwriting swirled across the pages, sometimes stern, sometimes poetic. Notes on gardening, entries about me, clipped recipes, even her thoughts on the family fractures. One page hit me like a freight train. "I think Melanie will grow up and forget to ask for things, not because she doesn't want them, but because she's been taught not to expect them. That's what scares me most." She saw me even when I didn't, That line stayed with me. Because she was right. I'd learned to shrink my needs, to apologize for my feelings before I even voiced them, to clean up after people who never said thank you. Winning the case didn't undo any of that, but it did give me something I hadn't had before: permission to rebuild. The estate redistribution took 2 more months. The house was put in my name. Darla and Trevor moved out, fast. I didn't ask where they went. A trust was created to repay what I was owed, not just tuition, but adjusted for interest, penalties, and loss of future earnings. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. But oddly, it didn't feel like reparations. It felt like evidence. Evidence that I hadn't made it all up, that I hadn't been the crazy, dramatic, resentful daughter, that I was right. And that being right is a strange kind of loneliness. I bought new locks for the house, repainted the walls, donated the furniture, turned what was once their living room into a personal library. People called me brave, but it didn't feel brave. It felt inevitable. Like I'd just finally stopped pretending the fire wasn't real and started putting it out. One afternoon, I walked past the mirror in the hallway and caught a glimpse of myself. Not just physically, emotionally. I looked older, tired but lighter, and I whispered, barely loud enough for the silence to hear, "You were never ungrateful." Because he had said it, over and over again, in his will, in his tone, in his absence. He made ungrateful my name, but now I was reclaiming it. Block 7. He left me a house. I gave myself a home. Owning the house felt strange. It was the same walls, same doors, same creaky step near the back hallway. But it no longer felt like his. It felt like a crime scene. Not of violence, but of abandonment. Emotional fingerprints on every surface. Unspoken expectations clinging to the air like dust. I moved in slowly. Not with boxes and tape, with intentions. Every item I brought had to answer a question. Does this belong to her, or to me? I kept some things. My mother's cookbook, tucked between the pantry walls. A framed photo of her holding me at age 4, both of us blurry but beaming. But other things? I let go. His watch collection, sold. The chair he always sat in to critique me, gone. The glass plaque on his office shelf that read, "Discipline is legacy," shattered accidentally on purpose and swept into the trash. I didn't hold a ceremony. I didn't burn sage or say goodbye. I just reclaimed space. But the most symbolic decision? What I did with the study. It used to be his pride and joy. Dark wood shelves, heavy desk, books he never read but liked to display. The room where he did taxes, scolded me for bad posture, and once grounded me for crying during a phone call. I turned it into a reading room. Light walls, a soft couch, a bookshelf filled with women's memoirs and historical fiction and poetry. June's journals rested on the top shelf, with a brass plaque that simply read, "For the woman who saw everything." I painted the door pale green. It wasn't dramatic, but it was mine. That's when the emails started. Trevor, again. This time softer. "I didn't know everything. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken for Dad." I didn't respond. Then Darla. A long, meandering message filled with qualifiers. "I was just trying to protect what your father built. You were always so closed off. We made mistakes, but you're not perfect either." I closed the laptop, because here's the thing, they still didn't get it. This wasn't about mistakes. This was about systems, about people who think silence is safer than truth, who weaponize politeness to bury harm. I started therapy. My therapist, Rosa, was gentle but honest. She didn't ask me to forgive. She asked me to define safety. It took me weeks to answer. Eventually, I told her, "Safety is walking through my house without preparing an apology." She nodded like she understood that more than I'd ever know. and slowly, I started inviting people in. My best friend Anna came for tea. We sat on the couch and watched old sitcoms and laughed so hard we cried. She brought a plant as a housewarming gift, a pothos that now climbs the windowsill like it owns the place. I joined a local book club, started teaching weekend workshops on preserving family archives. I even bought a welcome mat. One day, the neighbor, Mrs. Chambers, who'd lived next door for over 30 years, brought me cookies and said, "I always wondered what happened to the quiet girl who used to sit on the porch with her knees tucked up to her chin. I'm glad you came back." And in that moment, I realized I had come back. Not to them, not to my father, but to me. The version of me that never got a chance to exist in that house. Now, she was renovating the whole damn thing. Block 8. The house had one more secret to give me. It happened by accident. I was reorganizing the attic, not for nostalgia, just to make space. I had plans to convert it into a quiet studio for writing. The idea of building something creative on top of all the emotional rot felt poetic. The insulation up there was terrible. Dust danced through shafts of sunlight like ghosts, and every wooden board creaked in protest as I stepped across them. I moved an old trunk, one I didn't recognize, and noticed something strange. A gap in the floorboards. Small, barely visible. Like someone had tried to patch it but gave up halfway. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, made me kneel and pull at the edge. It gave way. Underneath was a narrow compartment, shallow, like a drawer meant for hiding, not storing. Inside, a single envelope, yellowed, sealed with wax. And across the front, in my grandmother's unmistakable cursive, "Do not read unless you're ready to forgive." I froze. It was like the house had been holding its breath. I sat down, cross-legged, trembling, and opened it. Inside, 5 handwritten pages. Her handwriting wasn't as steady this time. Shakier, probably from her final months. The tone was different too. Less like instructions, more like confession. The first line gutted me. "I need you to know something that might hurt before it heals." She told me that my mother had been afraid. Afraid that my father would raise me in bitterness. Afraid that June herself was too radical and too soft to raise me for the world. That in a moment of weakness, grief-stricken, over-medicated and manipulated, my mother had allowed Darla into the picture. She didn't want Darla to raise you. She didn't even like her. But she didn't fight hard enough, and I didn't push her. My stomach twisted. I think part of me believed that if I stayed close enough, I could protect you anyway. That I could reverse whatever damage they did later. But there is no later when you die in your sleep. She went on to describe a conversation she had with my father, a final one, where she begged him to revisit the will, to at least leave me something. He said, and I quote, "If she wants something, she should earn it like I did." That part I expected. What I didn't expect was the last paragraph. "Your father wasn't always this cruel, Melanie. He was once a man who held you like glass, terrified to drop you. I don't know when he became so small inside, but I believe something broke in him when your mother died. Something he never admitted. And finally, you don't have to forgive him, but I hope one day you'll stop holding the version of him that hurt you so tightly, just long enough to remember the version that didn't." I didn't know how to feel. Was this an attempt to absolve him? No. It was more complicated than that. She wasn't asking me to rewrite the past. She was giving me the final page. The one with the messy handwriting and unfinished thoughts. The human part. I sat there in the attic for a long time, the letter in my lap, tears drying on my cheeks without ever noticing they'd fallen. Because for the first time, I felt safe enough to consider something I never had before. Not justice, not revenge, not survival, but peace. Real, boring, quiet peace. The kind where nothing dramatic happens, where no one wins or loses, where I can just live without bracing for erasure. I folded the letter and tucked it between the pages of June's journal. Then I went downstairs, made tea, opened the window, and just sat. Block 9. I stopped trying to fix the legacy. I started building my own. Spring came slowly that year. I remember because I tracked it like a child, noticing the first daffodil in the yard, the way the light lingered just 10 minutes longer every afternoon. I started walking to the corner cafe each morning. Not because I needed the coffee, I had a French press at home, but because I needed the ritual, the routine of being seen, without explanation. Just a woman ordering a latte, no footnotes. The barista, Cam, always remembered my name. I don't think he knew my story, not really, but he said it like it mattered. "Good morning, Melanie." And that was enough. I was working again, part-time first, then consulting. I was helping local families archive their generational documents. I'd meet grandmothers who wanted to preserve recipes in binders, single moms trying to keep immigration paperwork from crumbling, even one retired couple who wanted to digitize their love letters. It was healing work, not just for them, for me. Because each file I touched, each photograph I flattened between acid-free sheets, reminded me that stories deserve to be protected, even mine. One afternoon, a woman from the county estate office called. Apparently, a distant relative, on my father's side, had passed, and they were sorting the extended inheritance tree. "Your name's on the short list," she said. "You're the last remaining direct descendant." I almost laughed. I thought about asking what was left. Land, coins, a dusty box of cufflinks. But then I said, "No thank you." Because I didn't need another heirloom from a family that spent decades teaching me I wasn't part of theirs. I'd built something better. I'd started publishing essays under a pen name, E. June Quinn, a nod to her, the woman who wrote me back into existence. The essays were quiet, reflective, not exposés, just personal meditations on memory, inheritance, forgiveness, and grief. One of them went viral. A podcast invited me to speak. I almost declined, then didn't. And there, in a small studio downtown, with headphones over my ears and a mic in front of me, I told the story. Not with bitterness, not with rage, with truth. When they asked how it ended, I said, it didn't. It changed shapes. Justice was the door. But healing? Healing is the house I built on the other side. They were quiet after that. Even the host had to pause. Because sometimes, survival stories end with courtrooms and settlements. But mine ends with a garden, tomatoes, basil, snapdragons, planted by my own hands, in a yard that once watched me sneak off and cry behind a hedge when no one remembered my birthday. Now it's mine. And this time, I remember. Block 10. He left a will. I left a legacy. It's been almost a year. The grass is taller in the backyard now. Not unkempt, just alive. The garden's in full bloom, and the pothos Anna gave me has taken over the windows like it owns the place. I let it. Sometimes I still get emails from estate attorneys or distant cousins asking questions about reconciliation or healing, like they read departments I am in charge of. I don't respond, because here's what I've learned. Not every story needs a reunion. Not every family deserves a second draft. Some endings are better left closed. A few months ago, I opened one last letter, one I'd written to myself. I found it inside one of June's journals, tucked between pages filled with clippings, notes, and one last photo of me as a baby, held in my mother's arms. The letter was dated the night before the court hearing. I don't even remember writing it, but it said, "If you win, don't let it make you hard. If you lose, don't let it make you small. Either way, you get to walk out whole. Don't forget, your worth isn't in what they withheld. It's in what you became in spite of it. I framed it, hung it by the door. Now, every time I leave the house, I see it. A reminder that I am not their failure to love. I am my own decision to continue. Sometimes I visit June's grave. I don't bring flowers. I bring news, updates, little victories, a new article published, a recipe I finally got right, a neighbor who complimented my handwriting. One time I told her, "You were right about everything, even the painful parts." And I swear, in that moment, the wind shifted like a response. I've stopped trying to reclaim what was taken from me, because I've already built something better. Not a perfect life, but an honest one. No secrets. No waiting rooms. No need for permission to feel anything at all. And now, when people ask what I inherited, I tell them the truth. Not land, not cash, not comfort. I inherited clarity. And in a world full of noise, that's worth more than gold.